Welcome back to the second in a two-part series on intellectual standards. In the previous lecture, we reviewed the first 5 common intellectual standards, and these standards included clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, and depth. Today, we're going to look at the final 4 common intellectual standards. These standards include breadth, logic, significance, and fairness. So, without further ado, let's take a look at breadth. When we talk about breadth, we want to make sure that we're being broad-minded. And this means that we're looking at an issue or a topic using multiple perspectives or multiple viewpoints. And what that means is that we have a mental position from which we view events. And we want to make sure that we look at things and consider many different mental positions that we have ourselves and that other people might have. When we are broad-minded, we make sure that we examine the topic completely. And this is one of the most essential of the intellectual standards because it allows us to really take into consideration the way that other people might think. The next common intellectual standard that we're going to look at is logic. Now, when we have an argument, we always have a premise and we have a conclusion. And the premise is the facts or the evidence that sets up a situation, and the conclusion is generally the result or the potential result that arises out of those events or actions. Now, in order for our argument to be logical, to be logically sound, we need to make sure that the premise and the conclusion are not contradictory. They can't go against each other, and they can't be conflicting. Instead, we need to make sure that our premise and our conclusion is mutually supportive. One of the ways that we do this is by asking ourselves whether or not our argument follows from the evidence, whether or not it's supported by the evidence and the facts that we've looked at already. The next standard that we're going to take a look at is significance. And what significance means is that our argument or our line of thinking is important, that it's of consequence, and that it has meaning. Now, especially when we're broad-minded, we come up with a lot of different ideas about a subject. And this is good. We want to have a lot of ideas, and we want to have a lot of different arguments and things to analyze. However, once we start analyzing these different ideas, once we start really looking at the arguments, we'll realize that even though we have many ideas, not all of the ideas are as equally important. Some ideas are going to be more important, and some ideas are going to be a lot less important. For example, when I'm teaching in front of a bunch of university students, many times they'll ask me questions that are pretty unimportant in the grand scheme of things. They might ask me things like, what do I need to get an A in this course? Or how many words does this essay need to be? Now, these might be important for the immediate topic at hand, and that means being successful in one class or being successful on one paper. However, if we want to look at what's really significant about being a college student, being a university student, then you need to be asking more significant questions like, what does it mean to be an educated person? Or what do I need in order to become educated? These are much more significant questions because the answers to these questions will stick with you for the rest of your life. If you're asking how many words you need for that essay for a particular assignment, that's going to be less important for you in the long run because it will leave you once you finish the assignment. The last intellectual standard that we're going to look at is a standard of fairness. And even though this is the last, it might be one of the most important. Now, when we talk about being fair, when we talk about fairness in our thinking, we need to be free from biases. We need to be free from favoritism. We need to make sure that we keep our self-interest out of our decision. And above all, we need to make sure that we're free from prejudice. Now, prejudice is a very important word and one that you'll see often. And basically, what it means is that you judge something before knowing all of the facts about it. So you might be prejudiced against a particular area, a particular subject, or maybe even a particular group. While prejudice is certainly not a great thing, it is something that we all naturally do. We all naturally think from our own perspective, and we all naturally try to think in terms of what is my self-interest, what benefits me the most. So prejudice is a natural part of life. It's a natural human condition. However, when being intellectual, when trying to be academic, we need to make sure that we identify what are our prejudices, and we need to make sure that we move beyond those prejudices. We need to make sure that we weigh all of the facts. We need to make sure that we weigh all of the evidence before we make a decision and before we try to argue one position over another. This has been an overview of 9 very common intellectual standards. When we are using these standards and when we're discussing things academically, you need to remember that these standards are not exclusive. They are inclusive. And what that means is you can't just make sure that your thoughts and your ideas are clear and accurate. You need to make sure that they follow and adhere all 9 of the intellectual standards. So you need to make sure that your ideas are clear, accurate, precise, relevant, deep. They're broad-minded. They have acceptable logic. They're significant, and they're fair. All of these 9 standards are required in order to be an intellectual and in order to practice academic thinking. Well, I hope these standards and introducing these 9 concepts have helped you to realize what is necessary in order to be a good thinker and to be an intellectual. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this lecture, and best of luck to you in the future.